Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. I'm coming to you from my wardrobe. Essentially this is the area I have decided is good to film on my computer, on my laptop. My wardrobe is my studio, so I have like a clothing rail behind me, but where I'm sat right now is my art studio, so it's kind of wardrobe art studio. So I'm sat in what looks like my wardrobe, but I'm actually sat at my art studio desk at the moment. So yeah, in today's video I wanted to talk about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So I've already mentioned Frankenstein in a video already where I talked about some of my favourite Gothic horror movies and mentioned Frankenstein briefly. Now, I'm not so much going to talk about DVDs or movies in this video today. I want to focus primarily on the book. The reason for that is because I would like to do a video at some point where I look at my collection of Frankenstein DVDs. I have quite a few. I do not have all of them. There are hundreds of adaptations of Frankenstein movies and movies that have stemmed originally from the story of Frankenstein. And I adore them. I find them fascinating. I certainly definitely want to do that video at some point. There's certain ones that I don't own that I will talk about anyway, ones that I've seen, but I do own quite a few myself, and I'm very proud of my collections of DVDs because for those of you who don't know me or haven't gathered yet, I hyperfixate on certain things that give me lots of dopamine. Autistic woman here. And certain things that I hyperfixate on, such as Frankenstein, when I have that interest in something, I want everything. I want the movies, I want the books, I want the soundtracks for all of the movies, I want the clothing that they wear in the movies. Like, I want everything. I want to squeeze absolutely all the remnants of juice until the skin is wrinkly and pruny, like out of these creations that I fall so obsessively madly in love with. And Frankenstein is one of those for me. So I will do a few different videos on the topic of Frankenstein, whether it's movies, book, so on and so forth. So today I'm going to be talking about the book Frankenstein. Now, I first read Frankenstein in high school, I believe. That's the first time those are the earliest memories I have of reading Frankenstein. I don't believe that I read it before. And I think it's very interesting to me um, that at different times of my life when I've read Frankenstein, I have got quite a different, or I've experienced quite a different reaction as a person. And the reason that I bring that up and think that is very important and very powerful is because what we're dealing with in the story, Dr. Frankenstein, and for those of you who don't know the story or vaguely know the story, Frankenstein is not the monster. Frankenstein is not the creation. Frankenstein is a mortal man, and his surname is Frankenstein, and he is a doctor. So, Dr. Frankenstein. So, when I refer to the character of Frankenstein, I'm not referring to somebody that's got bolts in their neck, that's lots of pieces of dead bodies that have been sewn together and electrocuted with lightning and brought back together. That's not in the book at all, actually. Um, we'll get to that, but we're talking about the actual man, Frankenstein, who is the doctor that created um, the monster, the creation. When I was younger and read the story of Frankenstein, I very much saw him as a victim. Um, and I think that's very interesting because the story of Frankenstein, when he's telling his own tale, he talks about himself like a victim. And so when I was young and emotionally immature, the story read to me as though he was the victim of this awful thing that sort of happened to him, you know. And I believe that at different times in my life, as I have gained emotional maturity, I have really seen this story from different perspectives. Looking at this story now is I have quite a vastly different opinion of Frankenstein, and where he tells his story as a victim, there is a massive dissociation from real understanding of responsibility and of acknowledgement of his own actions. And when he does talk about them, they're very glossed over. And so it is important to understand when you're reading the story of Frankenstein that the teller of the story is a narcissist and is operating from a very emotional, immature place and is delivering their story as a victim. And when you have that understanding, you're able to look at the story from several different perspectives because you can imagine yourself in the situation of Dr. Frankenstein. You can imagine yourself in the situation of the creation of the monster. You can imagine all of these kind of these different avenues of the different characters looking in on this story. And depending on the perspective of where you're looking at the story from, you're going to get something out of the story. And I would highly recommend, if you do have an interest in this story that is bordering on obsessive like me, that you read this story, going through it and actually looking at it from the perspective of different characters, because the reason I feel that this story is so appealing to myself and so many like me today, even though it's such an old classic story now, is because there is so much depth to this story. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So, this story was really the first science, what can I call, like science fiction based story. And the fact that it was written by a female author was huge because at the time, I believe, certainly if my facts are correct, at the time when Mary Shelley wrote her first edition and kind of took it to the publishers, she was offered something like 500 copies. That was it, which in comparison to a man at the time and certainly a reputable writer at the time, which, you know, her partner was a writer, her parents, there was no reason that she couldn't have got a much better deal, and probably would have done if she had written something romance based because she was female. But because of the fact that she was female and she was writing something horror and science fiction based, it was just very, very overlooked. And what she was given was really given because of the people around her, and also the potential suspicion of the fact that did she actually write it in the first place. And so it was published anonymously originally so that people did not know that it was a female publisher. But Percy Shelley, who then became her husband, wrote the foreword for the book originally. So people then assumed that it was written anonymously, but actually Percy Shelley had written it. And so, until stated otherwise, he got a lot of credit for the story, which is a shame, but um, obviously it was different times and we still see these types of things happening in the world of art, don't we? It is just something that, unfortunately, if the society around you is not challenging this kind of behavior, there isn't much you can do except for roll with the times, which I imagine for the woman who created such a forward thinking, um, and deeply psychological novel would have been extremely heartbreaking and very upsetting. So Mary Shelley was in herself a very forward thinking woman that given her relationship with Percy Shelley, who became her husband, and how they met and how their relationship was initially. He was married to another woman, had a child with another woman, and they were together. Mary Shelley, or Mary Godwin at the time, before they got married, and she would have been shunned from society, from her family, all of, all of the major support systems roles in her life for her choice of being with him. Whereas he, although people may have frowned on his behavior and the fact that, he wasn't taking responsibility for the fact that he was married and had a child elsewhere, he was a man, and so it wasn't really as condemned. And there was a lot of movement in the area of relationships looking somewhat differently and changing quite drastically at the time. And so he was not affected anywhere near as closely as she was. He was benefiting very, very strongly from it. And so, in falling in love and deciding to go against the grain of society and against the grain of the norm at the time, what the two of them did was actually create a monster. They created um, an issue that Mary Shelley primarily had to live with and paid for, whereas Percy Shelley really, in the artist circles and writer circles that he was moving in, um, wouldn't have been affected by anywhere near as much. We also know that Mary Shelley was a very um, I don't really know how to say it. I We know that she kept Percy Shelley's heart after he died, or some of his heart anyway. And after she died, it was found that she'd kept his heart. The reason I say that is because I think it's important to understand the uniqueness of Mary Shelley, the levels of um, perhaps grotesque that a woman of this time was able to appreciate. And her deep interest in the unique, the unusual, and science is what lends so strongly to the novel of Frankenstein. That's why I mentioned the heart thing, because I can say, oh, she was interested in science, oh, she was a little bit different. But I think the majority of people now would still feel a little bit squeamish, male, female, or otherwise, about keeping body parts, or even, ashes of a partner just in their desk. I think most people can understand that. So the fact that she really was that unique on that Gothic level as well, really living that level of Gothic romance in her daily life, um, and had that intense, almost, I feel bad saying it because obviously I don't know her and this is just my perspective, but I'm going to say obsessive connection with Percy, her husband, to the point where she wanted to keep this part of him physically close to her after his death. I think that understanding that is quite important when it comes to the story of Frankenstein, which essentially could be argued to be a metaphor for their relationship, which is that together they created this issue, this monster. Um, but then once this monster had been created, Percy Shelley didn't really want to take full responsibility for it that we're aware of. So together they've created this issue where Mary Shelley is shunned from society because of the fact that she's sleeping and living with another woman's husband. Everybody knows about it. Society has shunned her. Her family have shunned her. Um, and Percy Shelley, who is married to somebody else, is quite happily still having active non-private sexual intercourse with other women as well as Mary Shelley. And so she's kind of gone along for the ride thinking, we're on the same page, and is, in love with him, but is now paying the price for his behavior, which he really can't wrap his head around, can't see that that's happening, can only really see how he is being victimized, and can't really see what's happening to her. So it could be argued, and I certainly love the metaphor of Percy Shelley being Dr. Frankenstein, and Mary Shelley herself really understanding the depths of despair and loneliness that go into the creation of the monster, and being that monster, being shunned from society in that way, and really her only tether to the world being Percy Shelley or Dr. Frankenstein. Now, it's interesting that in the novel of Frankenstein, the creature is never actually given a name. Um, there is a beautiful quote, and I haven't written it down, I should have done, but there is a beautiful line in the book where the creature kind of mentions this, that, you didn't even give me a name. Like, I haven't even, I don't know what I am. I don't know what to call myself. Like, I don't even have a name, that kind of thing. And it is very telling of um, of Dr. Frankenstein, in the fact that for years he has worked obsessively to create this creature. And as soon as he does, he's so horrified at his own actions and at the result of his actions that he completely dissociates with it and just steps back and is like, no, I don't want anything to do with that. I am just gonna shut down, take no responsibility for this, and go back to the way things were before and just pretend this never happened. And obviously we can't do that. Life is not like that. There are always repercussions for our actions, and as is in life, it's the same in the story. And the repercussions of his actions in the story is that there is now this monster, and all the monster wants is connection, is understanding, is love. All the monster needs is the acknowledgement and understanding of its father, of its creator. And Dr. Frankenstein is just completely unwilling to do that, and at multiple points throughout the novel lies directly to the monster, manipulates the monster, tries to reason with the monster, make the monster think that he's doing the wrong rather than Frankenstein. Can't you see what you're doing? Can't you see how terrible your behavior is? Like, really feeding into, well, there's a reason you can't be in society, there's a reason you're a monster, and really putting all of that blame onto the monster, which is just very, very uh, common and very reflective of abusive, emotionally abusive relationships. And it's just such an interesting story how this young man, who is seen as absolutely brilliant, Dr. Frankenstein, obsesses and works his ass off basically to create this creature. No lightning involved. That's not a thing. That came about much, much later when the movies were created. I guess Hollywood brilliance, wanted something flashy. That's not in the story. And neither is Igor. Just putting that out there. He's not there. I'm sorry. There is some bromance if you like that, but it's not Igor. I'm sorry. So again, this is kind of why I wanted to keep them separate, because the movies are displayed very, very differently and portray lots of times a very different element of the story than the book. Um, so Frankenstein creates this creature completely, as I said, dissociates from who he has been up until this point, realizes that he's made a mistake, rather than take control of the situation, rather than acknowledge he has had any that he's made any mistakes, or that he should really do anything about this. He just runs away and pretends it never happened to begin with. And then when these diabolical um, repercussions of his actions do arise, he acts like a victim himself. Um, and when he does acknowledge, this is something that is happening because of me, woe is me, it is very much in that victimhood way. It is oh, I can't believe this is happening to the people I love and the people I care about, and now I have to live with those consequences. But there is never really a thought for the creation. There is never really a thought for the monster and what it must be like to be, pulled into this role without having asked for it, to now be this creation with no guidance, no understanding, no support system, and just completely and utterly alone in your despair, trying to move through the world and being attacked by everything and everyone around you, and not having a clue where you belong, where you fit, what your future will look like. Do you have a future? It's a really, really dark place for someone to be. And the narcissistic Dr. Frankenstein makes it all about him. Um, And I love that at different times in my life, depending on where my level of emotional maturity was and my own ability to take responsibility for myself and my actions, which obviously has changed dramatically since I was in high school, um, my understanding of the depths of this story has changed over and over again so many times. And I hope it will in the future as well. I would love that. But I think when we think of women of this time, we think of these sheltered little beings that, if they were going to do something as fantastic as writing a book, of course it has to be something like romance and whimsical fantasy and dreaming, because what on earth could they possibly know otherwise? And I think to have something so dark and disturbing as Frankenstein, and also as intelligent, um, so deeply metaphorical, psychological, and have this very clever element of science nonfiction completely brought into it as well. Um, it really is something else entirely, that created completely new genre for books and later movies. So I think that even if you're not a fan of the book Frankenstein, I think an interest in Mary Shelley alone, and appreciation for Mary Shelley alone, is huge. There's so much there to dive into. Just such an interesting person, from what we know. Perhaps not uh, everyone's cup of tea, definitely, but very, very interesting. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I don't know if I'll make a Frankenstein playlist. Maybe I will when I've done. Maybe I'll do it now. I'm not sure. At some point, maybe I'll do a Frankenstein playlist. If I don't do it now, I'll do it like when I add the movie video or whatever on as well. Okay, bye.